Text is one of the primary ways of placing notes inside of a Revit project. In this example, what we would like to do is we would like to place some notes sort of in this area of our drawing. This is a nice big blown up view, and quite frankly, it has more information than what we would want to have inside of our detail. So what we're going to do is we're going to move into our callout view, and we can see the little callout symbol right here. Now, if we just click inside of the view, zoom down, and we have a couple of different options. The way that I'm going to go is I'm going to double click here on this little circular shape, and it's going to take us directly to the callout view. If you have any problems with doing that, I'll also point out that underneath the project browser over here on the left-hand side, you could double click on callout of elevation 1-A. That's what this is currently named, and that will take you to the same view. So I'm going to move over here, just double click here on the little circular shape, and take us to our callout view. Now, the callout view right now has a scale of 1/4 of an inch equals a foot. And it's not necessarily a bad scale, but in this case, I just want it to be a scale that happens to be a little bit smaller. In this case, 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. So we can come down here to the scale, come up here, and then change this to be 1/8 inch equals a foot. And we can see when we do that how all the text looks bigger. Now, the reality of it is all the text is actually the same size as far as if it was going to print on a sheet. It's everything else that just looks a little bit smaller. What we want to do now is we're going to add, in this case, 3 different notes. One note is going to call out this concrete slab up here on top. Next note is going to be down here, and we're going to be calling out what this structure happens to be. Then the third note we're going to add is going to be a note relating to this concrete wall, and that's what we're looking at here, and it's beyond. It's sort of in the distance, and we're going to want to add a note there that describes this concrete wall isn't right in front of our face, it's back a little ways. Let's go ahead and get started. Up here at the top of the screen, we don't want to be in the Structure tab. Anything related to text or dimensions, or just think of anything that might have letters in it or numbers in it, almost always is underneath the Annotate tab. So go to Annotate. Here we can see our different commands, including those dimensions and the tags that you can place in order to be able to label our columns. But the thing that we're concerned about here is going to be our text. So come over here to where the big A is at and go ahead and select on that. Once you've done that, we have 2 different areas where most of our text properties are going to be located at. The first area is over here on the left-hand side. And if we click here where it has text 3/32 Arial, we can see 3 different text sizes that are currently available to us in our project. Now, in this example, the 3/32 Arial is going to be what we use, but I will point out that if you ever wanted to be able to make a modification to that to have your own custom text size, you can do that by coming over here to Edit Type, selecting on Edit Type, and then picking what size you want the font to be. Now, this isn't just what size is it going to be in this view, it's what size is it going to print at. So in this case, it's going to be 3/32. So anytime we would go and hit print and send this to a printer, it's always going to be 3/32, assume that we print the full size. The font shows up here as well. This is an Arial font. And if we would click here, we can see a list of all the standard out-of-the-box Windows fonts that would be available. As a result of that, you could pick whatever font or whatever text size you'd want whenever you're placing your notes. So we'll go ahead and click on OK. We'll just accept the defaults to this. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come up here and we'll take a look at the different commands that we have up here on the ribbon. The first thing that I care about are these 4 boxes right here. This first one, it just has the letter A in it. What this indicates is that it's going to place text without an arrow associated with it. An arrow is also considered a leader, so you might hear me call it that every once in a while. Over here, this is what's called a 1 segment. And as you can see in the preview, it just does 1 line with an arrow at the end. The one that we'll be using is going to be the 2 segment leader, and it's going to have 1 little line and then a second line pointing at the piece of text. And the third option that we have is the curved one, and it gives you sort of a more handwritten kind of looking leader, and it has more of an arc or a curve associated with it, as opposed to the straight lines the other 2 had. In this example, once again, we're going to come up here and we're just going to select on 2 segments. Move up here toward the top of the screen. And we're going to move our mouse down here and we're going to kind of point right in this location. Now click right in this area. It's not going to snap to it. Just click and then move your mouse up. Click once you get up here, just sort of outside of this box that shows up around the view. Now move over to the right and click again. So what we did is we just placed that leader that's associated with the text. It's click once for where you want the arrow to be at, click again for where you want that elbow to show up at, and then move across and click for where you want your text placement to be at. In this example, we're going to want this to be a 5-inch thick concrete slab. So that's what I'm going to type in. 5-inch concrete slab. Whenever you get done typing, just click somewhere out in space, and it'll automatically put that text with that proper size font that was picked off of the list over here inside of your project. And you can hit escape a couple of times in order to be able to get out of that part of the command. Now let's go ahead and place another piece of text down here that's going to be calling out what this particular beam happens to be, or what this particular column actually happens to be. So we'll come back up here again. We'll select on text. Now, just so that you can see it, I'm going to go ahead and just choose this one that says no leader. Usually I would continue to use the 2 segment, but just so we can try it, we're going to do the no leader one. Now, if you're going to place one with no leader, there's really 2 different ways you can go about doing it. You can either just click and then start typing, or you can draw what's called a text box, which is click, hold the mouse button down, and then do something that looks like this. It looks like a box. It's sort of like if you're going to be selecting a group of objects. And what that will do is it'll try to keep all the text inside of the box. I don't really care which way that you go. In this case, this is only going to be one little line of text, so it's not going to wrap around. But in our next text example, we'll see it where it's going to be long enough to wrap around, and this text box will actually affect what it is that we type in. So I'm just going to go ahead and let go of my mouse button somewhere over here and type in WWF 18 by 337, because that happens to be the size of this steel member that's over here. Now we can go ahead and just click out into space somewhere, and that places it. If we want to be able to move this around after the fact, all we have to do is hit escape a couple of times, and then move up here, click on the arrow, and you can see we can just move this around and kind of place it where we need to place it. Now, if we want to be able to add an arrow to this so that we can point to this area, that's what these buttons up here now allow us to do. So we can click the little plus sign next to whichever shape that we want to be able to create. In this case, we can see that there's a straight leader option, there's an arc option. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and just pick on this straight leader option that shows up here. See how this leader comes straight out like this? And we can click on this little dot and move this into place. Click on this dot, move it straight up. And now we have the leader pointing at the right object. One more piece of text we want to do, and it's going to be down here in the box. And we're going to come back up here to text, select on text. We're going to do this concrete wall, and it's going to be called beyond. So it'll say concrete wall and then the word beyond. Now I'm going to once again just do that box, if you will, kind of leader. So we're going to come in here with the text without the leader associated with it. I'm going to click once, do a box just around this area, and then let go. Now I'm going to type in concrete wall and I'm going to do the word beyond. You'll notice beyond was going to go over where this box was at, so it automatically wrapped it down to the level down below, or the line down below. So pretty much all this leaves us to do is add a couple more arrows and we'll be done placing this text. So we'll just do it the same way that we did this up here. Select on the piece of text, tell it that we want to be able to add a leader to it. In fact, in this case, I actually want to be able to add 2 leaders to it. So I'm going to pick the one on the right-hand side here. And then we're going to click on this arrow, kind of drag it down. You can see that I can drag on this little dot here and pull it up to whichever location I want it to be at. And I'm going to do the same thing here. And by having the arrows in this arrangement, it's sort of indicating that whether it's up or down or wherever it is, anywhere along this concrete wall is beyond and sort of in the background. When we're using text, we can take care of a lot of the annotation inside of our projects. And that's all done by coming up and selecting text off of the ribbon and then using the appropriate annotation tools. In this exercise, we're going to learn how to use our dimensioning tools. And in order to be able to do this, we're going to dimension the lower half of our building down here. So we're going to place a string of dimensions. It's going to go from here all the way on over. In fact, we'll place 3 different strings of dimensions. So let's go ahead and zoom in here on the lower half of our building. Next, dimensions are annotation objects, two-dimensional objects that only show up in the view that you place them in. So as a result of that, because they're annotation objects, we're going to come up here to the Annotate tab and then find our different dimensioning tools. One dimension I want to place first before we place our dimension string going across is to show off this little angular tool here. What it's going to allow us to do is actually put an angular dimension, sort of like what the preview there is showing us. So if we select on angular, and now we can kind of look around and see if we can find an angle that we can place this on. In this particular case, I'm just going to place it from right here to right here, just so we can see how the tool works. So it's just a matter of clicking on one line, clicking on the second line, and it automatically generates for us what that angle happens to be. And if you just click in space, it'll place it wherever that point is that you just clicked at. And if you hit escape a couple of times to get out of that, it'll place that dimension there, and it'll be a permanent dimension, and it'll print just the way that you see it on the screen. Now, some of these other dimensions, such as radial or diameter, work exactly the same way as that angular one did. All you have to do is pick that circular shape, and it'll automatically drop in the radial dimension or just automatically place a diameter dimension in that location. Arc length is very, very similar. You end up picking one spot on an arc, a second spot on an arc, and it'll automatically give you a dimension between those two spots. Now, the main dimensions here that we want to be able to focus on now are going to be linear and aligned. Now, if we're going to start, what we'd really like to do is start with aligned. So we'll go ahead and select on aligned up here. Now, an aligned dimension will work in situations where your dimensions aren't necessarily going up and down or from side to side. In this case, we don't really have a dimensional area that we can really dimension that on and show that kind of angle going on. But aligned dimensions have an extra property about them that makes them a lot more powerful than what your standard dimension would be. And that's the reason why I like to use them a lot more often than this linear dimension right here. That extra power is that you can dimension multiple things at a time by using an aligned dimension. So let's go ahead and try that. So come over here. We'll notice that there's a dimension here that says wall center lines, or a setting here that says wall center lines. Well, we can leave this for right now. It's not going to affect what we're getting ready to place. There's an option here that says pick, and it says individual references. Let's change this to be entire walls. And there's a big options button that shows up now. If you click on the options button, this is where some of the hidden power of the align dimension tool rests. What it will do is it will automatically dimension any openings you have in walls. It can automatically dimension any walls that intersect the wall you're getting ready to dimension. But it can also automatically dimension such things as your structural grids. Let's go ahead and try this. So right now, let's select on intersecting grids and click on OK. Now there's a wall that goes all the way across. If you pick on that wall, move straight down, you'll notice that each of the structural grid points now have a dimension snapping to them. You can see there's also a dimension here that says 15 foot and 10 foot. This is because we have a special condition going on in our wall, and it's trying to dimension that special condition as well. That's okay. We can make modifications to that so that dimension there doesn't necessarily show up that way. Now just move your dimension string completely down, and then somewhere out here, just go ahead and click. And that will place that entire dimension string going across. And hit escape a couple of times in order to be able to get out of the command. Now, if all we wanted was this dimension to go from structural grid to grid line to grid line to grid line, all we have to do is select on this, click on the little circle that shows up sort of in the middle here, and it's called Move Witness Line. And if you click and hold your mouse button down, move over to the structural grid that's right next to the area where you want to be able to get rid of the dimension, and then let go, it'll automatically move that line over and then get rid of that extra dimension that you didn't need. The next kind of dimension that we're going to do is still going to be an aligned dimension, but instead of picking the entire walls, we're just going to do the individual references this time. And if we select here and then select this grid line all the way down here at the end, we can move it down and we can see it's going to generate, in this case, a 100-foot dimension, which is the overall length between those two different grid lines. Now, there's one more that we can come in here and do, and let's move in here, and this time instead of doing a line dimension, let's just practice with doing a linear dimension. Now technically we could use a line dimension for this one as well, but just so you get some practice with using linear, let's choose on linear. With linear, it isn't quite as evident where it is that you're picking. In fact, it gets to be really hard to see. If you really squint and look really, really hard, you might be able to see a blue dot on your screen whenever you're clicking. And it's wherever that point is that you're selecting on, that's where that dimension is going to get placed. In this case, I'm taking the time to just click on each and every one of these corners here and placing a dimension to each one of those. And I'll go ahead and just drag this down. We can even drag it down here in between these two different dimension strings and just click once you get down here. But make sure you click out in space. If you hit the escape key or anything like that, it'll delete the entire dimension string. And obviously we didn't want to click all those different points and then accidentally delete the entire dimension string. One more change or modification that we can make to this is if we zoom in here, we can see there's a 4-foot dimension. Well, sometimes people like it when it's inside here, but one of the things that I found is I really dislike when these lines get broken up this way. It sometimes makes it very hard to read where that dimension is getting taken to. So one of the things that you can do is you can select on the dimension, click on this little dot that shows up right here, and you can pull it out to the side. All right, and it'll automatically add this little line, this little leader to the end of it, indicating where that dimension should be taken to. And we can do the same thing over here on this end. All right, and just pull it straight out. Now, I do want to point out one more thing, and it's possible that during this process you accidentally clicked on one of these dimensions or you accidentally clicked on one of the pieces of text. If you did that, and maybe you did it twice, you may have gotten this dialog box pop up on your screen. Now, this usually gets people excited because they think that they can come in here and change the dimensions and make it be something that it isn't. Basically, bluff or fool Revit into giving a bad dimension. But if you try to do that inside of Revit, and I'm just going to pick a random dimension and then try to click on OK to that, it gives you one of the biggest error dialog boxes that shows up inside of the program. Essentially tells you that you can't make changes to this dimension. The reasoning is that they don't want you to bluff or not draw things to scale in Revit. They really want you to make everything be to scale. And then if you do, all your dimensions will just work out. So this replace with text is really in here for such things as notes like field verify, or, well, you can kind of think of any other kind of piece of text you might want to place in between two different arrows, and you can replace this with whatever value that you wish. But if you wanted to be able to add maybe a plus or a minus or a diameter sign before or after this number, you can by doing it down here. Also, if you needed to place some piece of text above or below, you could do that as well. And in this case, I'm just going to type in field verify, and the line is listed as being below, and click on OK. And you'll notice that field verify is now a piece of text directly underneath that dimension that we tried to modify. What we need to remember is dimensioning in Revit is simple, but you always need to be able to select an object to dimension, and you can't fudge your dimensions. Drawing lines in Revit is accomplished in individual views and is done by using the line tool found underneath Annotate up here on the ribbon. And here we can see this is where the Detail Line tool resides. Now, in order to be able to use this tool, we first need to start thinking about, okay, what view do we want to be in order to be able to first draw these detail lines out? Where I would like to be able to add detail lines to is going to be in a section of our staircase. So, since our staircase currently doesn't have a section, we're going to need to place a section line into our staircase. So, up here underneath the View tab, because we're going to be creating a section view, we're going to select on Section. Next, I'm going to zoom in here, and then click once just to the right-hand side of the staircase. Then move over, and then click again. Next, I want to be able to see the other side of the staircase too, and right now it's pointing in this direction, so I can't. So we're just going to click on the little double arrows right here in order for us to be able to see this section looking in that direction and be able to see the entire staircase. Since the section has just gotten placed, A good practice is to be able to come over on the left-hand side underneath the project browser and then try renaming this section to be something that makes maybe a little bit more sense to us. Now, I can tell you from experience that whenever the last section that you place, it'll automatically try to place it there at the bottom of the list. Or in this case, since we've already done a section 1 and 2, it's going to place this as being section number 3. So I know that that's the one we need to work with. And since we just cut a section through our staircase, let's just keep this simple and just call this section stairs. So to do that, all you have to do is right-click where it says section 3, come up here to rename, and then we'll rename this stairs. And click on OK. Now we have a section that happens to be named stairs. If we wanted to double-click on the little circular shape, we could go to that view, or we can just double-click where it has stairs, and it'll take us directly to our stair section. Now, the next thing we need to decide is this the view that we want to be able to do our different sort of detail work in. And frankly, at this scale and how big of a view this is probably going to be some really fine work that we're going to be doing. It's going to be down here at the bottom of the steps. As a result of that, this probably isn't the view that we really want to be in either. But we wouldn't have been able to create this callout view, which is an enlarged detail view, without creating the section first. So now that we're in the section, we're going to come up here and create a callout view in order to be able to blow the bottom half of our staircase up so that we can see it at a much larger scale. Now we're going to go ahead and just click once right here, move over, and once we have a circle roughly this shape, go ahead and click again. By doing this, it's automatically created another view, in this case underneath sections, and is being called callout of stairs. The reason why it's called that is because we are currently underneath the stairs. It was created in stairs, and it just named it callout because, well, technically it's a little callout bubble that we added to it. In this case, we could leave it as callout of stairs, but let's go ahead and rename this as well, and we're just going to call this detail at stairs. So you'll remember, just select on it, right-click, rename, and detail at stairs. One last thing before we go to that. I really hate it when my callout bubbles are inside of a floor. It makes them very hard to read whenever they're actually finally placed onto a sheet. So what we need to do is select on the line that's associated with this callout, click on the little circular shape and hold the mouse button down and just pull this up so that the callout is no longer right there in the middle of that floor. Now that we've done the cleanup, let's go ahead and go to this detail at stairs. All right, now we can see this enlarged detail view here. But really, a 1/4 inch equals a foot probably isn't big enough for what we're trying to accomplish here. So let's go ahead and change this to be 3/4 of an inch equals a foot. We can now see that the line work is automatically adjusted for us. It's not as thick as it was. And it just looks like a nice sort of prettier thing to be able to draw inside of. And when I use the term pretty, really what we're discussing is it's much easier to read and it's going to communicate the design that much easier. So now that we finally have done all this work, well, we can finally come up and start to use our line work tools. So underneath annotate, we're going to move over to detail line. Now our detail lines have a few different options associated with them, such as straight lines, draw rectangles, circles, polygons, arcs, ellipses. If you've used other drafting programs in the past, you've probably have had all these different shapes available to you as well. In this case, in the case of Revit, they combine it all inside of one command, and it allows you to just select detail lines and then pick whatever the appropriate shape is off of the list. Also, we'll see that there's some different line styles associated over here, such as centerline, demolished, hidden. Also, there's different thicknesses, thin line, medium lines, wide lines. Now, we're not going to get too much into the actual creation of these at this point, but in just a moment, I will show you where those settings are located at. For this detail, though, I will say that we will be using medium lines to be drawing the rest of our objects. Now, so that you know where that property comes from, underneath the Manage tab here, toward the middle of your screen, you're going to have a button that says Additional Settings. And if you select on Additional Settings, about halfway down the list, we're going to see such things as line styles, line weights, and line patterns. Line weights, that's your thicknesses. Line patterns, that's center, hidden, dashed, your standard drafting line types. Line styles, if we click on the little plus after clicking on line styles, we can see this is a list of those same kind of lines that we had on our list that we could choose from. It also has the line weights and the line styles from those other two menus I just pointed out. Finally, pretty much everything we've seen inside of Revit has either been black or blue so far. And the reason why most of these colors have been in place is because of the line color that shows up here underneath the line styles. For right now, we're just going to leave this the same. So we'll just go ahead and click on cancel to that. Going to go up to the green tab up here. It says modify and place detail lines. Medium lines is going to be just fine for us. We're going to zoom in here and pick a point. I'm going to actually, in this case, just go just slightly to the right of the middle. I'm going to pick right about here and then draw a line up in this direction. Now this line, what it's going to be indicating is going to be indicating a piece of rebar that's going to be coming up from that point all the way on up the stairs. And we could always use our text tools to be able to note this after the fact if we wished, and just kind of move it up to the end. You can see how this has the medium line weight. This would be about the equivalent of the thin lines. Next, let's add some more rebar-looking shapes, in this case, little circles. So once again, to do that, come up here, detail line. This time, pick circle. Move down to right around this area right here. Click once, and then just make a little 1/4-inch circle. Okay. If it ever is just snapped just a little bit too tiny, every once in a while you'll get this message. This says element is too small on screen. Pretty much it means is if it ends up getting to be less than maybe a 1/16 of an inch, then it's going to say it's too small on the screen. So you might need to be able to make that just a little bit bigger. So once again, we'll just come down here to the circle shape, click again, kind of make a circle. It's just a tiny bit bigger, or maybe even zoom in so we can actually see it. Click again. I can see this is a 1/4 inch. That's the size that I wanted. Now we could continue to do that all the way on up if we wished, or we could just select on that, use the copy command, make sure that multiple is checked, pick the intersection of there, and just keep picking the intersection of, intersection of, all the way on up, repeating that rebar shape all the way on up the model. Now the reason why we're doing this as opposed to actually using the rebar tools in the program is that there are going to be occasions where there's really no reason to model something three-dimensionally, unless you're going to be taking the quantity of every piece of steel that's inside of the stairs. And frankly, in every project, you might not need that capability. So you might use the line work tool instead of the three-dimensional modeling tools in order to be able to create these kinds of conditions. Also, if you decide to use line work instead of the 3D tools, it's going to keep your model leaner, lighter, and keep things faster than it having to process big three-dimensional entities. Drawing detail lines in Revit is used to illustrate conditions that otherwise wouldn't need to be modeled inside of the program. Regions are simple drafting tools for creating material indications and patterns. If you're used to an AutoCAD drawing environment, you might be used to this being called hatch patterns. If you're used to doing things by hand, you might have heard this being called a poché pattern. But inside of Revit, it's considered a region. Now, we're going to go ahead and zoom in down here at the bottom half of our staircase. And this just happens to be our detail at stairs section view. Now that we're here, what we're going to do is we're going to add a little key down here at the bottom of the staircase. And what this key is going to allow us to do is be able to have some concrete that moves down here, kind of a rectangular shape, and then sort of holds the bottom of the staircase there at the floor level. In order to be able to draw that, of course, we're going to need to come up here to the Annotate tab, because that's where all of our drafting tools are located at. And we're going to pick the Region command. So let's go ahead and select on Region. Next, we want to use our line work tool. Now, I will point out that we could draw circles and boxes and ellipses and any shape that we want to. But in this case, just using the line tool is going to work just fine for us. In fact, it's probably going to be the primary tool that you use inside of this command. Now, down here at the end of the stairs, we're going to click once. We're going to move straight down. In this case, we're going to come down 2.5 inches because that's just a nice number to do. Next, we're going to move over, and we're going to come over 10.5 inches. Once we come there, we're going to come straight up and then die in right here. Now that we've done this, we're about half of the way done in drawing where we want our region to be at. Now, the next thing is so far we've been doing this with what's called thin lines, and we can see thin lines right here. And thin lines, of course, indicating what thickness the line is going to be whenever it finally gets drawn. maybe we don't want to use thin lines. Maybe we want to be able to use a thicker line, like a wide line or a medium line. If we do, we can select on that and just start drawing that line shape in. What's going to happen in this case, though, is that we need to make this be one continuous line as we follow it all the way around. We don't really want to have a line here and a line going right here, and the reason is this is all going to be one continuous concrete piece. So we really don't want to have any line work in here at all. In order to be able to address that, we can't really use a line that has a certain thickness associated with it. That's the reason why Revit includes inside of it this tool called Invisible Lines, which will draw a line that when we click the big green check mark up here, will just vanish on the screen. So let's go ahead and try that. So we'll select on Invisible Lines. Next, we're going to pick the endpoint where we kind of left off at. And even though we will adjust this later, we're just going to move down here and click, and then click again in order to be able to place our invisible lines. And if I zoom in a little bit, we can see that line work we just placed. One more thing before we click on the big green check mark. If we click right now, it's going to put a bunch of vertical lines in this area that we've been drawing in. Now, the pattern that we really need is a concrete pattern, not a bunch of vertical lines. So we're going to need to create a filled region associated with this area right here. So over here underneath Properties, we're going to come over here to Edit Type and click on Edit Type. Next, we can see it says Fill Pattern and Vertical Drafting. Well, let's go ahead and leave this alone, but let's create a duplicate of this, and we're going to give it a name of Concrete. So we're going to click Duplicate, and we're going to name it Concrete, and click OK. Now that we've done that, it has the same properties as that previous pattern that we had. But if we come here to the list, we can see that all those patterns that actually were inside of the project to begin with, including vertical lines, still shows up here on the list. Now that we have concrete, we're going to come here to the fill pattern. You can click inside of the box. If nothing happens automatically, come over here to the right-hand side and click on this little box here with the 3 dots in it. And this will take you to your Fill Patterns dialog box. This will give you all those different poche, hatch patterns, fill patterns that are available inside of the program. Next, you can scroll up toward the top, and what we're going to be looking for is concrete. Here we can see that concrete pattern that happens to be the same pattern we've been looking at elsewhere in this view. We'll click on OK. We'll click on OK one more time. Now we have a concrete pattern, and we know that when we place the big green check mark over here, this whole thing is going to have a concrete fill look to it. So let's go ahead and click on the big green check mark. Now, one of the things that's happened is that it did not get rid of the lines that were already there. It's came pretty close. You can see it's actually masked out about half of it, but it didn't get rid of all of them. In order to be able to get rid of all of them, this is all we're going to have to do. We select back on the pattern again, and we'll get these little arrows that show up right here. If we click on the arrows, we can drag it up just slightly until it's just over the top of the black line. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Pull it up so it's just a little bit over the top of the black line, and then click out into space. Now we can start to see it was able to clean up all those different areas. One other thing to know is that right now I'm looking over here and I'm seeing just a little bit extra line. Frankly, you might not be even able to tell that. That could be just a concrete pattern. But just to make sure, I'm just going to click on this line one more time. Pull it back ever so slightly, maybe pull it up just a tiny bit. And with just a little bit of fudge factor in here, we can start to get rid of this black line that shows up so we don't have to see it anymore. Last thing I'll mention, we can still see there's a line going across here, but so that you know what it is that you're looking at. This isn't something that we weren't able to, let's use the term mask out. What that actually is just the symbol indication for the first floor level that's going across at that location. So, by using your region tools, you can create any type of look that you require to represent different materials in your details, in your elevation views, as well as your plan views. Detail components are used for quick insertion of commonly drawn two-dimensional items. They are most often used in section views and drafting views to document often drawn items that don't require modeling in 3D. Where we can find those is going to be underneath Annotate, and then sort of toward the middle here, we have this option for Component. If we select on the word Component, we can then see the list of our different detail components that are currently loaded in the project, over here underneath Properties in the Type Selector list. Now, what we're looking at right here are CMU blocks, as well as some metal decking, and in this case, it says a W wide flange section. Now, I'm not going to actually place this, but just so you can see it, if I click on the W12 by 26 and move my mouse over, we can now see we have that steel beam shape. If I moved over here instead, change that to be a CMU block shape, move it back over, and then if I would want to place this kind of object into my view, all I would have to do is click. Now, we will be doing that here in a moment, but I do want to point out that we're not just limited to these shapes that are coming in our project by default. What we can do is that we can come over here to where it has Load Family and select on Load Family. So once you click on Load Family, there's going to be an option here for detail items. If you double click on that, here we have our different divisions. And we can choose from one of these different divisions what kind of detail that we might want to load into our project. For instance, if we decided to go into masonry, just go ahead and double click on that. We have our different further divisions that we can pick on. And in this case, maybe we want to do concrete unit masonry. Here, if we click on one of these options and then use the arrow keys on our keyboard, we can start to scroll through all these different two-dimensional components that we could decide to just load directly into our project. It could be different steel shapes, obviously masonry units, wood shapes, trusses, you name it, there's a good chance that you can find it somewhere as a detail component inside of Revit just coming by default. One other thing that I'll mention is if you ever want to be able to create these things from scratch, it is possible to do that as well. I'm just going to hit cancel to this. All you have to do is come up here to the big R. You're going to do a new family. And then down here on the list, you'll see that there's an option for a detail item. And you'll just double click on that. It'll open up what's called the family editor. And then you can start drawing in one of these detail components. Now, we will be doing some modifications to a detail component here in just a moment, so I'm not going to click on Open right now, but this is where you can find the base template to be able to draw any of these detail components in. So I'm going to go ahead and move over here and hit Cancel, and we're going to go ahead and insert in our very first detail component into this view. Now, the detail component that we want to place is going to be this metal deck component, and I'm going to pick on this 1.5-inch metal deck. Next, move over here into the project, and here we can see that ribbing that's associated with the metal deck, usually if you're cutting it in section. Now, I realize that this particular floor that we're getting ready to place this in, technically it's a slab. It doesn't really have this metal deck associated with it. But if this had been a flooring condition where the metal deck would actually need to be in, this is a great representation of how you would go about placing it in. So next, we can just move over here and click once. Keep moving over, click again. You'll almost feel them snap into place really once they get kind of to the end of another one. So you can do even spacing, but there's a better way to be evenly spacing this metal deck going all the way on across. In order to be able to do that, there's actually another command which is directly related to this command that we're currently in. So underneath Annotate, we're going to look for a component, but instead of clicking on component, we're going to look for this little triangular shape that shows up right next to it. Click on that, and this time we're going to use a repeating detail component. A repeating detail component is exactly what it sounds like. It's a detail component just like we just placed, except it allows itself to be repeated again and again and again. Now, if we look over here on the list, we currently have CMU, but there's also an option for a metal deck. Let's go ahead and click on that metal deck. We're going to pick the endpoint of where that last detail component was at, and then just move straight on over. You can see how it's repeating that detail again and again and again. Right now, it's showing up on the underside. That's not really a big deal for us. All we have to do is hit the space bar, and it'll automatically flip it to the other side. And then just click once you get out to the end of the view. So you can see how easy it is to repeat a detail component again and again. One thing that I'd like to do with this detail component, though, is right now we're still seeing the concrete going through it. And realistically, in this condition, there wouldn't be any concrete in here. So we're going to need to come in here and modify the detail component so we can no longer see that concrete. So to do it, we're going to select on one of the detail components, in this case, this one piece of metal deck. And we're going to come up here to Edit Family. And when we click on Edit Family, it's going to take us immediately into what's called the Family Editor. This is the exact same environment that I was talking about earlier, where we could draw one of these things from scratch. The only difference is this already has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines already drawn inside of it, and it just happens to be this particular detail component that we've been placing. Now, what we're going to need to do in order to be able to modify this is either A, we could select on the individual lines and then make changes to it. This is just like using our normal line work tools inside of Revit. Or, what's going to really help us in this case to be able to get rid of that extra material, is we're going to need to create a masking region on the inside of this. Now, a masking region, its whole job in life is to be able to mask out other materials that might be in the way. So we're going to go ahead and select on masking region. Next, over here, there's this option here. It says detail items. We want to choose invisible lines. Detail items is actually a line style that they created inside of this template, and so is invisible lines. If you use invisible lines, these are lines that will not show up in the view that they've been drawn in, essentially. So we're going to select each of these points using our line work tool and just sort of play connect the dots all the way around our detail. And then click the big green check mark. And then click somewhere out here in space. Right now, we really can't see much going on in here, but the reason is just a little white masking out background that's showing up here. Now we need to load this into our project. So we can come up here to load in the project and just click on that big button there. If you have more than one project open, it'll ask you which project do you want to load it in. After you do that, you may get this menu that says, you're trying to load the family metal deck, and it goes on. But essentially it's asking, do you want to update the current family that's in your project? And the answer is yes, we do. And when we do that, keep an eye on each of these. Because we added that masking region in, we should no longer see that material there in the background. See how it just masks that material out in each and every one of these locations? Now, it's important to remember that whenever we're doing this, this is not a three-dimensional item. If we need to place this in other views, we would have to draw it again. Now, when I say that, this is now still available to us over here on our list. So if we ever need to be able to place one of these detail items in, it's not a big deal. From here on out, all we have to do is come up here to annotate and then pick the detail component off of the list. But this won't automatically show up in each and every section. You're going to have to draw it again, section by section by section, if you want this same level of detail to show up in each and every one of them. So, our detail components are perhaps the fastest way to draw and document commonly experienced conditions. They can be created by using the drafting tools that we find up there underneath the Annotate tab. Then all that's left is to simply insert that detail in to any view that you may require it in.